Hello everyone. So we have an article here from Time magazine and it was posted yesterday. And if you can believe this, they actually admit to having a cabal that is controlling the election. Now, with all of this talk that they've used for years now about Trump running conspiracy theories, as if they knew what the president knows. So I don't even understand how they can combat conspiracy theories, quote unquote, that Trump is being accused of when they themselves are not privy to these types of information that they accuse are actual conspiracy theories. The only conspiracy theories that they allow are their own. But we'll read on to the article. The article headline is The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. A weird thing happened right after the November 3rd election. Nothing. The nation was braced for chaos. Liberal groups had vowed to take to the streets, planning hundreds of protests across the country. Right-wing militias were girding for battle. In a poll before Election Day, 75% of Americans voiced concern about violence. And let's stop there in the first paragraph. There was already violence. We had BLM and Antifa all across the nation. We had Jerry Nadler try to say that it was all a myth. They were burning down innocent stores that had nothing to do with their whole agenda. And it was happening all across the country. I guess we just ignore what we want to ignore. But read on. Instead, an eerie quiet descended. As President Trump refused to concede, the response was not mass action, but crickets. When media organizations called the race for Joe Biden on November 7, jubilation broke out instead as people thronged cities across the United States to celebrate the Democrat process that resulted in Trump's ouster. And they did not cram the streets. This was not a cramming of the streets. You don't want to go around saying that all of these liberals and all of these Democrats throng the streets, because that is totally against COVID regulations. And we saw the inauguration crowds that were really sparse. A second odd thing happened amid Trump's attempts to reverse the result. Corporate America turned on him. Hundreds of major business leaders, many of whom had backed Trump candidacy and supported his policies, called on him to concede. To the president, something felt amiss. Quote, "It was all very, very strange," Trump said on December 2nd. Within days after the election, we witnessed an orchestrated effort to anoint the winner, even while many key states were still being counted. What are they saying here? In a way, Trump was right. This is their words. This is Time Life saying Trump was right. There was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, one that both curtailed the protests and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Both surprises were the result of an informal alliance. It was okay because it's an informal alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. The pact was formalized in a terse, little-notice joint statement of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and AFL-CIO published on Election Day. Both sides would come to see it as sort of implicit bargain inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive racial justice protests, in which the forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace and oppose Trump's assault on democracy. And keep in mind, there was no Trump assaulting democracy. You had people that were protesting in various states, and the only people that had legal jurisdiction to stop them were the governors, the politicians of that state. The handshake between business and labor was just one component of a vast cross-partisan campaign to protect the election. Sounds about right. An extraordinary shadow effort dedicated not to winning the vote, but to ensuring it would be free and fair, credible and uncorrupted. For more than a year, a loosely organized coalition of operatives scrambled to shore up America's institution as they came under simultaneous attack from a remorseless pandemic and autocratically inclined president. Though much of this activity took place on the left, it was separate from the Biden campaign and crossed ideological lines, with crucial contributions by nonpartisan and conservative actors. The scenario the shadow campaigners were desperate to stop was not a Trump victory. It was an election so calamitous that no result could be discerned at all, a failure of the central act of democratic self-governance that has been the hallmark of America since its founding. If that were the case, then why wasn't Trump allowed to win? Why were votes held against him? Why were all Biden votes counted and Trump's votes suppressed? We have to ask these type of questions, or else we don't have a democracy. And furthermore, America's not a democracy, it's a republic. Their work touched every aspect of the election. They got states to change voting systems and laws and helped secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding. They fended off voter suppression lawsuits, recruited armies of poll workers, and got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. They're openly admitting that they use people in poll stations and they fended off voter suppression lawsuits. So people who are saying that this is actually happening, they're saying that they're happy that it was successful, that people's voices were shut down. They also got millions of people to vote out of the clear blue for the first time ever. But we read on. They successfully pressured social media companies to take a harder line against disinformation and use data-driven strategies to fight viral smears. These folks are saying in time right now, they actually had pressured social media outlets to do their bidding, to get rid of the other side. This is the right wing of democracy, and they're saying that they were actually suppressing it. They executed national public awareness campaigns that helped Americans understand how the vote count would unfold over days or weeks, preventing Trump's conspiracy theories and false claims of victory from getting more traction. And again, they don't know more than the President of the United States themselves. And so when they try to say that Trump or any president is peddling conspiracy theories, we have to believe that they have an agenda. They don't know as much as the President of the United States. Sorry, you're not that smart. After Election Day, they monitored every pressure point to ensure that Trump could not overturn the result. See, they made sure that every little rung of the ladder that Trump could climb, fighting out of the basement, so to speak, he was not going to get out of there. They made sure of it. Quote, the untold story of the election is thousands of people on both parties who accompanied the triumph of American democracy at its very foundation, says Norm Ziason, a prominent lawyer and former Obama administration official who recruited Republicans and Democrats to board the voter protection program. And every time we hear about these Republicans that jump sides, that go and support Democrats and their ideologies, understand that most of those Republicans are what we call rhinos. They've been voting across party lines for years. They've been voting with Democrat policies. They themselves are Democrats. They just have the name Republican. With this Norm fellow, it is a former Obama administration official. I mean, really, do we take his voice on anything regarding Trump? Probably not. It's going to be biased. But we read on. For Trump and his allies were running their own campaign to spoil the election. The president spent months insisting that the mail ballots were a Democrat plot and the election would be rigged. His henchmen at the state level sought it to block their use, while his lawyers brought dozens of spurious suits to make it more difficult to vote. An intensification of the GOP's legacy of suppressive tactics. So here the GOP is using suppressive tactics, but they weren't. You just got done saying the exact thing that you're saying that the GOP did. It's absolutely bonkers, the hypocrisy. You just got done saying it. Before the election, Trump plotted to block a legitimate vote count, and he spent the months following the November 3rd trying to steal the election. Again, he's not allowed to steal the election, but you are. And he spent the months following November 3rd trying to steal the election. He lost. The lawsuits and conspiracy theories, again, only your conspiracy theories, pressure on state and local officials, and finally summoning his army of supporters to the January 6th rally that ended in deadly violence at the Capitol. Never mind all of these Democrats coming out before all these BLM riots and telling people to attack them at their homes. Miss Maxine Waters told people to go to people's homes, for goodness sake. You have AOC lying about these people threatening her life, not even being there at the time that she's saying this. When you say this type of stuff about people so often, they have no recourse but to attack you. You've become a bully. And every once in a while, people take pot shots at the bully. You best believe that. But there was so many people that died in the BLM riots, it's not even funny. So when they complain about some deadly violence at the Capitol, understand that the Democrats themselves are directly connected with violence that happened under BLM and Antifa. So when you had a autonomous zone that was filled up with people that weren't allowing cops to come in, weren't allowing firefighters to come in, weren't allowing paramedics to come in, that is a serious problem, and many injuries and deaths occurred as well. So they get off saying this as what? They're better because this got more limelight? What happened in the Capitol almost needed to happen. Understand that politicians, as a rule, need to be knocked down a rung or two every once in a while. If these people don't live in fear at all of the American public, they will keep on passing legislation that only benefits them and screws the American people. But we read on to the article. The democracy campaigners watched with alarm. Quote, every week we felt like we were in a struggle to try to pull off this election without the country going through a real dangerous moment of unraveling, says former GOP Representative Zach Wamp, a Trump supporter who helped coordinate a bipartisan election protection council. Quote, we can look back and say this thing went pretty well, but it was not all clear in September and October that it was going to be the case. This is the inside story of the conspiracy to save the 2020 election based on access to the group's inner workings. Never before seen documents and interviews with dozens of those involved from across the political spectrum. It is the story of an unprecedented, creative, and determined campaign whose success also reveals how close the nation came to disaster. Quote, every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome of the election was defeated, says Ian Basson, co-founder of Protect Democracy, a nonpartisan rule of law advocacy group. But it's massively important for the country to understand that it did not happen accidentally. The system didn't work magically. Democracy is not self-executing. Oh my goodness. So they didn't believe in actual democracy, so they put it in their own hands. You have a nonpartisan rule of law advocacy group saying that it's massively important for the country to understand that it didn't happen accidentally. Democracy is not self-executing. So democracy doesn't happen by itself. Someone has to control it, right? Kind of like social media controlling your words. It sounds kind of appalling that Time is so open about this that they don't even care. They say that Trump is involved in conspiracy theories. This group is literally saying there's a cabal that's controlling elections. And that in itself isn't a conspiracy theory. So you've basically pigeonholed yourself into saying that it was in fact a rigged thing. But we read on. That's why the participants want the secret history of the 2020 election told, even though it sounds like a paranoid fever dream. A well-funded cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies working together behind the scenes to influence perception, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. They were not rigging the election, they were fortifying it, and they believe the public needs to understand the system's fragility in order to ensure that democracy in America endures. That is the most asinine paragraph I've probably read in my life. Here Time is actually saying this is a secret history of the 2020 election. They're saying that a powerful group of people from all kinds of industries and people with different kind of thoughts work together behind the scenes to actually change rules and laws and to change and censor media coverage, to control the information to you, the public, to Democrats alike, to everyone. When Twitter censored Trump, he didn't just censor the Republicans from talking to Trump. No, they cut all of the Democrats out of the loop, too. This isn't democracy. We scroll down a little further on the Time Life article. Securing the vote. The first task was overhauling America's bulky election infrastructure in the middle of a pandemic. For the thousands of local, mostly nonpartisan officials who administer elections, the most urgent need was money. They needed protective equipment like masks, gloves, and hand sanitizer. They needed to pay for postcards letting people know they could vote absentee, or in some states, to mail ballots to every voter. They needed additional staff and scanners to process ballots. In March, activists appealed to Congress to steer COVID relief money to election administration. So, COVID relief money actually went to our election. Just let that sit in your head for a little bit. Led by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, more than 150 organizations signed a letter to every member of Congress seeking $2 billion in election funding. It was somewhat successful. The CARES Act, passed later that month, contained $400 million in grants to state election administrators. But the next tranche of relief funding didn't add to that number. It wasn't going to be enough. Private philanthropy stepped into the breach. An assortment of foundations contributed tens of millions to election administration funding. We wonder who those contributors are. The Klan Zuckerberg Initiative chipped in $300 million. Quote, it was a failure at the federal level that 250 local election officials were forced to apply for philanthropic grants to fill their needs, says Amber McReynolds, a former Denver election official who heads the nonpartisan National Vote at Home Institute. McReynolds' 2-year organization became a clearinghouse for a nation struggling to adapt. The Institute gave secretaries of state from both parties technical advice on everything from which vendors to use to how to locate drop boxes. Local officials are the most trusted sources of election information, but few can afford a press secretary. So the Institute distributed communication toolkits. In a presentation to Podzorder's group, McReynolds detailed the importance of absentee ballots for shortening lines at polling places and preventing an election crisis. And what would their crisis be? Losing the election, people catching a whole bunch of COVID when they went to the election booths? The Institute worked to help 37 states, and D.C. bolstered mail-in voting. But it wouldn't be worth much if people didn't take advantage of it. Part of the challenge was logistical. Each state had different rules for when and how ballots could be requested and returned. The Voter Participation Center, which in a normal year would have deployed canvassers door to door to get out the vote, instead conducted focus groups in April and May to find out what would get people in to vote by mail. In August and September, it sent ballot applications to 15 million people in key states, 4.6 million of whom returned them. In mailings and digital ads, the group urged people not to wait for Election Day. Quote, all the work we have done for 17 years was built at this moment of bringing democracy to people's doorsteps, says Tom Lopatch, the center's CEO. So they worked on this cabal for all of 17 years. And Trump is the one with conspiracy theories. It's kind of funny. He actually brought this up to all of us a long time ago. He brought this up before he was ever president. You said this was a conspiracy theory, and now you're touting that it actually happened. It's amazing time that you don't see the hypocrisy. You're literally spitting it right out of your mouth. The effort had to overcome heightened skepticism in more communities. Many black voters preferred to exercise their franchise in person or didn't trust the mail. National Civil Rights Group worked with local organizations to get the word out that this was the best way to ensure one's vote was counted. In Philadelphia, for example, advocates distributed, quote, voting safety kits containing masks, hand sanitizer, and information brochures. Quote, we had to get the message out that this is safe, reliable, and you can trust it, said Hannah Fried of All Voting is Local. At the same time, Democratic lawmakers battled a historic tide of pre-election litigation. The pandemic intensified the party's usual tangling in the courts, but the lawyers noticed something else as well. Quote, the litigation brought by the Trump campaign of a piece with the broader campaign to sow doubt about mail voting was making novel claims and using theories no court has ever accepted, said Wendy Weister, a voting rights expert at the Brennan Center of Justice at NYU. Quote, they read more like lawsuits designed to send a message rather than achieve a legal outcome. And part of that is true. He wanted people to understand that these conspiracy theories, as you call them, were actually true. And that message needed to get out. But the only one allowed to put that message out is apparently you, Time. In the end, nearly half of the electorate cast ballots by mail in 2020, practically a revolution in how people vote. About a quarter voted early in person. Only a quarter of voters cast their ballots the traditional way, in person on Election Day. We're going to stop with one more piece to this article, the disinformation defense. And we think it's going to be a doozy before we get into it. This disinformation defense is probably going to be full of junk. Bad actors spreading false information is nothing new. For decades, campaigns have grappled with everything from anonymous calls claiming that the election has been rescheduled to flyers spreading nasty smears about candidates' families. But Trump's lies and conspiracy theories, the viral force of social media, and the involvement of foreign meddlers made disinformation a broader, deeper threat to the 2020 vote. Laura Quinn, a veteran progressive operative who co-founded Catalyst, began studying this problem a few years ago. She piloted a nameless secret project, which she has never before publicly discussed, that tracked disinformation online and tried to figure out how to combat it. One component was tracking dangerous lies that might otherwise spread unnoticed. Researchers then provided information to campaigners or the media to track down sources and expose them. And before we go on, we want to ask the question, did you actually bring up a program or a computer algorithm or even some type of robot or machine that actually could decipher what is true and what is not? And I don't mean just a group of fact checkers. I don't mean some algorithm that looks for something that says Trump. Does your algorithms actually know what truth and lies are? Because without having that kind of machinery, you're not scientifically evolving. You're not trying to be scientifically accurate. Because as every scientist knows, you have to have a machine to corroborate the results that you're seeing with your naked eye. And right now, we're seeing people dictate what is the truth and what isn't. We're seeing the media dictate what the truth is and what it isn't. And here we're seeing it plain as day that Time is trying to say they're the only ones allowed to come up with cockamamie conspiracy theories. Remember, they talked an awful lot about the Russia hoax. The most important takeaway from Quinn's research, however, was that engaging with toxic content only made it worse. Quote, when you get attacked, the instinct is to push back, call it out, say, quote, this isn't true, Quinn says. Quote, but the more engagement something gets, the more platforms boost it. The algorithm reads that as, oh, this is popular, people want more of it. That only works in liberal circles, though. We've noticed that here on our very own channel that it only works in liberal circles. But we read on. The solution, she concluded, was to pressure platforms to enforce their rules, both by removing content or accounts that spread disinformation and by more aggressively policing it in the first place. Quote, the platforms have policies against certain types of malign behavior, but they haven't been enforcing them, she says. And boy howdy, they have been enforcing them. A month before the election, they made sure a ton of YouTubers were knocked off of YouTube just to make sure that it paved the way for Election Day. And that goes back to Time Life talking about their cabal. Quinn's research gave ammunition to advocates pushing social media platforms to take a harder line. In November 2019, Mark Zuckerberg invited 9 civil rights leaders to dinner at his home, where they warned him about the danger of election-related falsehoods that they were already spreading unchecked. Quote, if it took pushing, urging conversations, brainstorming, all of that to get a place where it ended up with more rigorous rules and enforcements, says Venta Gupta, president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, who attended the dinner but also met with Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey and others. And again, this is a coordinated attack. They're saying there was a large cabal. Jack Dorsey's the same guy that went ahead and booted Trump off of Twitter. He booted other people that happened to support Trump, and many Trump supporters were attacked on Twitter and left completely because of the nonsensical nature of it. This, without a doubt, is a cabal, and Time Life is now confirming it. We've been saying it for a long, long time. This article, without a doubt, confirms our suspicions. It makes everything more credible. And if you're reading this and you think, man, these people were just looking out for democracy, understand they did it to you too. You didn't get a choice, Mr. Democrat. You didn't get a choice on what your democracy was. Maybe this year you wanted to vote for Trump. Maybe this year you didn't want to vote for Joe Biden. But they didn't care. And again, this goes back to them saying there are conspiracy theories out there, but not Trump conspiracy theories. Anyway, folks, you guys have a wonderful afternoon, a good night, a good evening, whichever. Please like, share, and subscribe. We really do appreciate that around here. Also, don't forget to hit the notification bell. If you don't hit the notification bell, you might have a problem getting our videos. God bless each and every one of you. See ya.